This first page of the table of contents covers topics 1 through 12. Why disposal matters, the legal foundations, coverage, key definitions, what qualifies a property for disposal, building the disposal committee, the documents you will need, the master flow from start to finish, inspection, condition rating, appraisal, and the 10 modes of disposal. Next slide. This second page covers topics 13 through 24, the deep practical core of the guide. Public auction in complete detail, negotiated sale, condemnation and destruction, transfers, barter, donation, return to supplier, sale to employees, junk and scrap disposal, direct negotiation, special property categories, dropping property from the books, the complete checklist, lost property, the auditor's role, and personal liability. Next slide. The final page covers topics 25 through 28. 40 misconceptions corrected, 40 common pitfalls and their fixes, frequently asked questions, and a quick reference summary. Next slide. We now begin section 1, Why Disposal Matters. Disposal is not an afterthought. It is the final, regulated phase of a government property's entire life cycle, and waiting too long has real financial consequences. This first page of the table of contents covers topics 1 through 12. Why disposal matters, the legal foundations, coverage, key definitions, what qualifies a property for disposal, building the disposal committee, the documents you will need, the master flow from start to finish, inspection, condition rating, appraisal, and the 10 modes of disposal. Next slide. This second page covers topics 13 through 24, the deep practical core of the guide. Public auction in complete detail, negotiated sale, condemnation and destruction, transfers, barter, donation, return to supplier, sale to employees, junk and scrap disposal, direct negotiation, special property categories, dropping property from the books, the complete checklist, lost property, the auditor's role, and personal liability. Next slide. The final page covers topics 25 through 28. 40 misconceptions corrected, 40 common pitfalls and their fixes, frequently asked questions, and a quick reference summary. Next slide. We now begin section 1, Why Disposal Matters. Disposal is not an afterthought. It is the final, regulated phase of a government property's entire life cycle, and waiting too long has real financial consequences. Next slide. Every piece of government property moves through a life cycle: planning, acquisition, operation and maintenance, monitoring, renewal or rehabilitation, and finally, disposal. Disposal is that last phase, not a housekeeping chore performed only when storage rooms are full, but a planned, regulated stage that begins the moment a property is acquired and ends only when it has been properly appraised, disposed of through an authorized method, and formally removed from the books. This point is drawn from Part 1, Item A, Item 1, of the current revised Manual on Disposal. Next slide. There are 4 broad warning signs, drawn from Item 2 of that same part, that disposal should begin. The property is already unserviceable. It has reached its estimated useful life. It can no longer provide the expected service because it has become obsolete, or it is simply no longer needed by the office holding it. In plain terms, if a property no longer works, has outlived its expected lifespan, has been overtaken by newer technology, or nobody actually uses it anymore, it's time to start the disposal conversation. Next slide. Here's an important caution. Delaying disposal is never neutral. Every month a property sits unused, it deteriorates further, its resale value drops, storage space stays occupied, and the accountable officer keeps carrying responsibility for something that should already be off the books. Disposal proceedings should begin immediately once a property qualifies, not deferred to year-end or whenever paperwork becomes convenient. Next slide. These rules are not bureaucratic formalities. They trace back to a foundational policy, stated in Section 2 of the Government Auditing Code. that all government resources must be managed, expended, or used in accordance with law, and safeguarded against loss or wastage through illegal or improper disposition. That responsibility rests directly with the head of the office holding the property. Correct disposal is how that responsibility gets discharged, not sidestepped. Next slide. We move now to Section 2, the legal foundations. Every rule in this guide traces back to a specific law, circular, or manual, and this section lays out the complete map, with exact citations, so nothing here is left unsupported. Next slide. The current, controlling procedure for disposing of government property is a joint circular from the Commission on Audit and the Department of Budget and Management, dated January 30th, 2024, known as the Revised Manual on the Disposal of Government Properties. It repeals the older National Budget Circular that had governed disposal since 1992, and it does not cover real property, meaning land and buildings, which follow separate guidelines. Next slide. Underneath that circular sit several statutes. The Government Auditing Code, Presidential Decree No. 1445, Section 79, is the foundational law on destroying or selling unserviceable property. The Local Government Code of 1991 gives local government units their own dedicated sections, numbers 379 through 383, found under Book 2, Title 6, with specific peso thresholds for provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays. 2 environmental statutes govern hazardous and electronic waste disposal, and a series of earlier executive orders established the original disposal committee framework. Next slide. Here is the exact wording of Section 79 of the Government Auditing Code. Quote, "When government property has become unserviceable for any cause, or is no longer needed, it shall, upon application of the officer accountable therefore, be inspected by the head of the agency or his duly authorized representative in the presence of the auditor concerned, and, if found to be valueless or unsaleable, it may be destroyed in their presence. If found to be valuable, it may be sold at public auction to the highest bidder under the supervision of the proper committee on award, in the presence of the auditor concerned." End quote. This single provision is really the seed from which everything else in this guide grows. Next slide. And here is the local government version, Section 379 of the Local Government Code. Quote, "When property of any local government unit has become unserviceable for any cause or is no longer needed, it shall, upon application of the officer accountable therefore, be inspected and appraised by the provincial, city or municipal auditor, as the case may be, or his duly authorized representative or that of the Commission on Audit, and, if found valueless or unusable, shall be destroyed in the presence of the inspecting officer." End quote. Notice this closely mirrors the national rule, but is written specifically for local governments. Next slide. This next rule matters enormously for anything sold by private arrangement rather than public auction. Section 380 of the Local Government Code, quote, "Property no longer needed may also be disposed of at a private sale at such price as may be determined by the Committee on Awards, subject to the approval of the Commission on Audit or its duly authorized representative when the acquisition or transfer cost of the property exceeds 50,000 pesos in the case of provinces and cities, and 25,000 pesos in the case of municipalities and barangays. In case of real property, the disposal shall be subject to the approval of the Commission on Audit regardless of the value or cost involved." End quote. That is the exact statutory text. The next several slides show how the Commission's own later issuances describe applying it in practice. Next slide. To summarize the numbers just quoted, for public auction, newspaper publication is required once the acquisition cost exceeds 100,000 pesos for provinces and cities, or 50,000 pesos for municipalities. Barangays have no separate newspaper threshold stated. For negotiated sale, the Commission on Audit's approval is named in the text once the cost exceeds 50,000 pesos for provinces and cities, or 25,000 pesos for municipalities and barangays. And for negotiated sale of real property specifically, that approval is named regardless of value. Next slide. Now here is where this guide becomes especially careful, because this is one of the most common points of confusion in disposal work. Section 380, as written, names commission approval for negotiated sales above those thresholds. But two later commission issuances describe how that provision is actually carried out today, and the next two slides show you both, in their own exact words, without this guide picking a side. Next slide. Commission on Audit Circular number 95-006, dated May 18, 1995, states, quote, "This Commission hereby lifts all pre-audit activities presently being performed on financial transactions of national government agencies, government-owned and/or controlled corporations, and local government units. The following audit activities previously performed by COA auditors shall not be prerequisites to implementation or prosecution of projects, perfection of contracts, payment of claims, and/or approval of applications filed with the agencies, witnessing of condemnation or destruction, and approval of negotiated price of unserviceable government property and other disposable assets of the audited agencies." End quote. Notice that phrase very carefully. Both witnessing condemnation and approving negotiated price are named as pre-audit activities that were lifted. Next slide. Commission on Audit Memorandum number 95-088, dated July 3, 1995, item 3.4.1, states, quote, "The negotiated sale of unserviceable government property and other assets pursuant to existing laws and regulations, notably Section 79 of PD 1445 and Section 380 of Republic Act No. 7160, shall no longer require the prior approval of this Commission or its representative in the audited agency. The legality and propriety of the transaction, including the reasonableness of the selling price, shall be passed upon by the auditing unit in post-audit." End quote. Next slide. Now here's an update that matters a great deal, and it comes directly from a circular a listener sent in after reviewing an earlier version of this guide, which is exactly the kind of check this guide encourages. Commission on Audit Circular number 2011-002, dated July 22, 2011, states, quote, "This Commission has resolved to reaffirm the concept that fiscal responsibility resides with agency management. Guided by the foregoing, and in order to accelerate the delivery of public services and ensure facilitation of government transactions, this Commission hereby withdraws selective pre-audit under COA Circular number 2009-002, and thereby lifts all pre-audit activities presently being performed on financial transactions of the national government agencies, government-owned and/or controlled corporations and local government units, except those required by existing law." End quote. Here's the history in brief. The 1995 circular totally lifted pre-audit. Circular number 2009-002, dated May 18, 2009, then reinstituted pre-audit for selected transactions. And this 2011 circular withdrew that selective pre-audit and lifted it again. Circular number 2011-002 is therefore the more recent general authority on this question, and this guide now treats it as such throughout. Next slide. So here is where this guide lands, updated to reflect that more recent circular, and it is a deliberately careful landing. Section 380 of the Local Government Code names commission approval above certain thresholds, and keeps that requirement without exception for real property. Commission Circular 95-006, Commission Memorandum 95-088, and, more recently, Commission Circular 2011-002, describe pre-audit activities, including negotiated price approval, as lifted, moving that review to post-audit instead. One caution worth being direct about: the 2011 circular restates the general lifting in broad terms, but it does not repeat the 1995 circular's itemized list of specific activities, such as witnessing bid openings or condemnation. This guide could not locate a 2011-era memorandum reissuing that itemized detail, so later sections referencing those specific 1995 mechanics are flagged accordingly, rather than presented as freshly confirmed. This guide takes no position on how these texts should be reconciled in a specific case. That determination belongs to the agency and its assigned audit team. Next slide. 2 more rules deserve attention. First, transferring property without cost to another agency or local government unit needs Sangunian approval, under Section 381 of the Local Government Code. This is layered on top of the general disposal rules, and it's easy to miss because the National Manual doesn't repeat it. Second, under Section 382, duty-free imported heavy equipment, garbage trucks, and fire trucks cannot legally be disposed of, by any method, within 5 years of importation. Selling early doesn't void the sale, but it shifts liability for the unpaid duties and taxes onto the buyer. Next slide. We move into Section 3, Coverage and Key Definitions. Before applying any rule, it helps to know exactly what it covers, and the precise meaning of the terms it uses, because a lot of confusion in this field comes simply from using a term loosely. Next slide. What's covered? All departments and agencies under the executive branch, including regional and field offices, state universities and colleges, government corporations and their subsidiaries, local water districts and every local government unit, and museum materials, copyright documents, and patent models, handled with the National Museum, National Library, or Intellectual Property Office. What's excluded? Real property, public records, governed by National Archives rules. Imported property still consigned to government through foreign aid where ownership hasn't transferred. And antique property and works of art, valued instead by the National Museum. Next slide. Let's cover value and condition terms. Acquisition cost is the price actually paid, plus related acquisition expenses. Appraisal is computing a property's value to set the government's minimum selling price. Current market value is the price a property would fetch in the open market. Condition factor is an adjustment reflecting the actual physical condition of major components. Salvage value is 10% of acquisition cost. Junk value is the going scrap price for the property's basic materials. On timing and status, estimated useful life is how long a property is expected to remain useful. Effective remaining useful life is estimated life minus years already in service. Beyond economic repair means repair cost would exceed 50% of current market value. Obsolete properties have lost usefulness through technology or procedure change. And unserviceable properties can no longer be repaired, or are repairable but simply no longer needed. Next slide. Now people, money, and process terms. Floor price is the disposal committee's minimum price, never less than the appraised value. Reserve price is used in direct negotiation, the average of floor price and the buyer's initial offer. Direct negotiation means offering property to one identified, willing buyer. Negotiated sale is a private arrangement sale, available only after 2 failed public auctions. On property categories, equipment is used daily, useful life over 1 year, costing above 50,000 pesos. Non-expendable properties aren't consumed by use, life over 1 year, value above 50,000 pesos. Expendable properties are consumed or lose identity when used. And sensitive properties are dangerous if lost or stolen, such as weapons, explosives, or hazardous materials. Next slide. We move to Section 4, determining what qualifies for disposal. Only one of 9 specific conditions is enough to start the process. Next slide. Meeting just one of these is enough. 1. It has exceeded its estimated useful life. 2. It can no longer be repaired or reconditioned. 3. It's beyond economic repair. 4. It has become obsolete through technological advances. 5. It's still serviceable but no longer needed, due to a change in the agency's mandate. 6. It's a supply, material, or piece of equipment no longer needed. 7. It's unused stock that has become dangerous to keep. 8. It was abandoned within the agency's premises, with no known owner. And 9. It's issued to a retiring official, under specific conditions covered later in this guide. Next slide. A quick note. Motor vehicles for land transportation may be deemed unserviceable under circumstances specified in separate National Budget Agency guidelines on vehicle acquisition and classification. Check those guidelines specifically before processing a vehicle for disposal, in addition to the 9 general conditions. Next slide. We enter Section 5, Building the Disposal Committee. Every disposal starts here, with a properly constituted, properly authorized committee. Next slide. On composition, the chairperson must meet a minimum rank, for a local government unit, at least a department head. One member is the head of the administrative service or division. Another is the head of the property section or unit. Additional personnel may be added, as long as this core group stays intact. On approval of the committee's formation, for a department, the department secretary; for an attached agency, the head of agency; for a corporation or state college, the governing board; and for a local government unit, the local chief executive. Next slide. The committee inspects, appraises, and values properties. It sets the final appraised value. It determines and recommends the appropriate method of disposal. It runs the actual disposal proceedings. It makes sure only intended disposal items are included, nothing else. And it ensures confidential data is extracted and secured from any electronic equipment before disposal. An easy step to overlook, but a serious one to miss. Next slide. Once the committee makes a recommendation, someone approves it. For a national agency's central office, the department secretary. For a regional office, the head of that regional office. For a government corporation, the governing board. For a state college, again the governing board. And for a local government unit, the local chief executive concerned. Next slide. A committee needs administrative support, and that's the secretariat, usually the property division or unit. It handles the paperwork trail, agendas, minutes, resolutions, and safekeeping of records. It manages the sale and distribution of auction documents and posts disposal opportunities publicly. And it serves as the single point of contact between the committee, bidders or buyers, and the public. Next slide. We move into Section 6, Documents you will need. 3 core reports drive every disposal. Next slide. The first is the Inventory and Inspection Report of Unserviceable Property, the IIRUP, which accounts for properties subject to disposal and is the basis for removing them from the books. The second is the Waste Materials Report, covering expendable materials, supplies, and consumables. The third is the Property Transfer Report, used whenever property moves from one accountable officer, agency, or fund cluster to another. Next slide. The Inventory and Inspection Report has 2 portions. The inventory portion needs the date acquired, description, property number, quantity, unit cost, total cost, accumulated depreciation, net book value, and remarks on condition, certified by the property officer and verified by the head of the accounting unit. The inspection portion needs the appraised value, the disposition method used, additional remarks, and signatures from the inspector and a witness. It's prepared in triplicate, the accounting unit, the auditor, and the property officer's file. Next slide. You'll also need an individual survey report, certified by the supply officer and their supervisor, a list of any missing spare parts, similarly certified, stencils of chassis and engine numbers for motor vehicles, current photographs showing all sides of the property, and a completed checklist for unserviceable equipment. Gathering these up front saves you from scrambling later. Next slide. We reach Section 7, the Master Flow, start to finish. 11 steps connect every part of this guide into a single sequence. Next slide. Step 1. Identify the property, confirming it meets at least one of the 9 qualifying conditions. Step 2. Constitute or activate the committee. Step 3. Prepare the documentation. Step 4. Conduct the physical inspection. Step 5. Rate the condition, from very good down to scrap. Step 6. Appraise the property. Step 7. Choose the method of disposal. Step 8. Get approval from the local chief executive or equivalent authority. Step 9. Execute the disposal. Step 10. Document everything and collect proceeds. And Step 11. Drop the property from the books, closing accountability formally. Next slide. Here's an important caution to carry through the rest of this guide. Inspection, condition rating, and appraisal always happen before the method of disposal is finally chosen and approved. Negotiating a price before a valid appraisal exists reverses this sequence, and is one of the most frequent sources of audit exceptions. Next slide. We move to Section 8, Inspection in Practice. First-hand observation always supplements the paperwork, it never replaces it. Next slide. A proper inspection confirms that the property matches what's described in the report on file, its operational status and the quality of past maintenance, any damaged, worn, or missing parts, whether it's economically repairable, extent of use and rate of wear, whether it's obsolete and whether spare parts are still available, whether it still has market demand, its physical location and how it could be transported, and for junk items, which parts could be salvaged and reused elsewhere. Next slide. We enter Section 9, Rating Condition, step by step. 5 bands, weighted by component, form the backbone of every appraisal that follows. Next slide. There are 5 condition bands. Very good, 80 to 100%, excellent condition, no repairs needed. Good, 55 to 75%, some minor repairs needed. Fair, 35 to 50%, used below full capacity, needing general repairs. Poor, 15 to 30%, well below full capacity, needing extensive repairs soon. And scrap, 0 to 10%, no longer serviceable to any practical degree, regardless of repair. Next slide. A vehicle or piece of heavy equipment is rarely uniform in condition. The engine might be excellent while the body is poor. So each major component gets its own rating, multiplied by that component's share of the property's total value, and the results are added together to produce one overall condition factor. For simple items with no major components, like furniture, the condition factor is simply the rating of the whole unit. And computers and similar items go straight to scrap valuation, because of how quickly technology becomes obsolete. Next slide. As an example, here's how a vehicle's value typically breaks down. The engine represents 23% of total value. Body and chassis, 35%. Transmission, 7%. Differential, 5%. And everything else combined, 30%. So if the engine is in poor condition but the body and chassis are excellent, the overall condition factor leans toward excellent, because body and chassis carry more weight. Next slide. Component weight tables like the one just shown exist for passenger buses, graders, bulldozers, dump trucks, cranes, loaders, excavators, tractors, road rollers, forklifts, air conditioning units, typewriters, dental equipment, motorcycles, generating sets, welding machines, air compressors, and chainsaws. When appraising a specific piece of equipment, consult the complete reference table for that exact type. Next slide. We move to Section 10, Appraisal, Setting the Price. The objective is simple to state: a fair minimum price that protects government's interest. Next slide. The whole point of appraisal is to set the government's minimum selling price, so that whatever mode of disposal is eventually used, the government receives fair compensation. This is not optional. Appraisal happens first, based on the inspection report and condition rating, regardless of whether the property will end up sold at auction, negotiated, donated, or destroyed as junk. Next slide. There's a clear hierarchy, used in order. First, current market value, whenever available, requiring at least 3 advertised prices for comparable properties, the lowest becoming the CMV. Second, acquisition cost, used when CMV isn't available. Third, junk or scrap value, for property that can no longer be repaired, based on prevailing scrap prices per unit weight. Always try the first method before falling back to the next. Next slide. A few more rules. On timing, an appraisal is valid for only 6 months. If unsold after that, it must be redone. The committee decides collectively, and when it can't agree unanimously, majority vote prevails. On special cases, imported components with no local replacement are treated as junk. A lost or destroyed property being assessed for accountability purposes gets a condition factor of 1.0, and computers and peripherals go straight to junk value. Next slide. We enter section 11, Appraisal Formulae, worked through. This section gives you the exact formulas, followed by a complete worked computation. Next slide. Here's the first formula. Appraised value equals current market value, multiplied by condition factor 1, divided by condition factor 2. Let's unpack this on the next slide. Next slide. AV is the appraised value you're solving for. CMV is the current market value, the lowest of at least 3 advertised prices for comparable property. CF1 is the condition factor of the property actually being appraised. CF2 is the condition factor of the comparable property used to source the CMV. In short, take the market price of a similar item, then scale it based on how your item's condition compares to that comparable item's condition. Next slide. When current market value isn't available, acquisition cost steps in, with 2 formulas. For imported property, appraised value equals acquisition cost, times the currency fluctuation factor, times condition factor. The currency fluctuation factor is the peso to dollar rate at appraisal year, divided by the rate at acquisition year, always using actual historical central bank rates. For locally manufactured property, appraised value equals acquisition cost, times the price index factor, times condition factor. This applies only to property that's 100% locally sourced. Next slide. Let's walk through a full worked example. A 1995 double cab pickup, acquired for 495,000 pesos, is being appraised for disposal. Step 1. Rating the subject vehicle's condition produces a combined condition factor of 0.7795. Step 2. Canvassing 3 comparable advertised prices gives 209,000, 260,000, and 285,000 pesos. The lowest, 209,000, becomes the current market value. Step 3. The comparable vehicle's own condition factor works out to 0.6050. Step 4. Applying the formula. 209,000 pesos, multiplied by 0.7795 divided by 0.6050. The result, an appraised value of 269,282 pesos, which becomes the floor price for whichever disposal method follows. Next slide. If a property is beyond repair, skip the condition factor math and use junk value. Canvass the current market price per unit weight of scrap metal, using at least 3 canvas prices, then multiply by the property's actual weight. A 500 kilo vehicle with scrap trading at 5 pesos per kilo appraises at 2,500 pesos. Next slide. We reach section 12, the 10 modes of disposal. One property can be disposed of in any of 10 different ways, and choosing the most advantageous one is the trick. Next slide. Here they are. 1. Condemnation or destruction, for valueless or hazardous property. 2. Transfer to another agency. 3. Barter, a direct exchange with another government agency. 4. Donation, for exceptional cases. 5. Return to supplier. 6. Sale to employees. 7. Public auction, the default method for sale. 8. Negotiated sale, only after 2 failed public auctions. 9. Sale of junk or recycling. And 10. Direct negotiation, for a limited market with one identified buyer. Next slide. If the disposal method chosen is sale, public auction is the default choice. All the other sale methods apply only under specific qualifying circumstances, not as a matter of convenience. The next several sections walk through every mode in complete operational detail, starting with public auction. Next slide. We now reach section 13, Public Auction, the complete guide. From the decision to sell, to the buyer walking away with the property, every step, every requirement. This is the longest section in this guide, because public auction is the method you'll use most often. Next slide. There are 2 forms. Sealed public bidding is the default approach. Bidders submit sealed tenders by a set deadline, tenders are open publicly at a set date, time, and place, and the award goes to the highest complying bidder. Viva voce, or open outcry, is used for items of insignificant value or needing immediate disposal, and for waste materials and low-value spare parts. It's conducted directly by the disposal committee, with bidding happening live, out loud, in real time. Next slide. Step 1. Complete the prerequisites. Identification, committee constitution, documentation, inspection, condition rating, and appraisal must already be done. In other words, everything covered in sections 4 through 11 of this guide has to be finished before you even start thinking about an auction, because the appraisal is what sets the floor price you're about to advertise. Step 2. The committee recommends auction as the most advantageous method. Step 3. The approving authority approves, the local chief executive for an LGU, not the committee itself, since a committee recommends but does not have final say. Step 4. Set the floor price, never less than the appraised value. This is the number you computed back in section 11. Step 5. Prepare the invitation to bid, the master document that tells every prospective bidder what's for sale, when, and under what rules. Step 6. Publish and post it. 7 calendar days at the agency, 3 public places in the locality, the agency website, and newspaper publication if the peso threshold from section 2 is met. Think of this step as casting the widest reasonable net, since a poorly publicized auction usually means fewer bidders and a lower final price. Step 7. Notify the auditor, at least 5 days before the scheduled opening, per Commission Circular 95/006. This is a courtesy notice that keeps the door open for observation, not a request that has to be answered before you can proceed, as this guide explained in detail earlier. Next slide. Step 8. Allow inspection, giving interested bidders the chance to see the property before they commit money to a bond. A buyer who's never seen the item is a buyer who's likely to walk away later, so this step protects the auction's credibility as much as it protects the bidder. Step 9. Hold the pre-auction conference, if scheduled, to answer questions and clear up ambiguity in the invitation to bid before tenders are locked in. Step 10. Bidders submit tenders and bonds, at least 3 sealed copies, with a bond of at least 10% of the minimum auction price. That bond is what keeps a winning bidder honest, since walking away means losing it. Step 11. Choose lot strategy for multi-item sales, covered in detail a few slides ahead. Step 12. The deadline closes. Incomplete or unbonded tenders are automatically disqualified, no exceptions, no late entries, because fairness to every other bidder depends on a hard cutoff. Step 13. No withdrawals after opening, since once tenders are opened, everyone else's strategy was built assuming the field wouldn't change. Step 14. Open the tenders at the announced time and place. This may be live streamed for added transparency. Step 15. Evaluate for compliance. checking that every requirement in the invitation to bid was actually met. Step 16. Prepare the abstract of bidding, a triplicate record of every tender received, which becomes the paper trail that later proves the auction was run fairly. Next slide. Step 17. Determine the outcome. Award if the top bid meets the floor. Adjust if it's below floor, using the 10% excessive shortfall test from Section 13, or declare failure if there were no compliant bids at all. Step 18. Award to the highest complying bidder. Ties are broken by live bidding between the tied parties, same day, so the government never has to arbitrarily pick a winner between two equal offers. Step 19. Return losing bidders' bonds immediately, since holding onto someone else's money after they've lost fairly has no legal basis. Step 20. Collect the balance, in cash, check, or digital payment, within 5 working days. This is a hard deadline, not a suggestion, precisely because Step 21 exists. Handle non-payment by cancelling the award, forfeiting the bond, and moving to the second highest bidder, who then posts a fresh bond of their own. Step 22. The buyer claims the property within 30 calendar days, witnessed, with a signed tally-out sheet, so there's a documented moment when custody actually changes hands. Step 23. The buyer covers taxes and fees, meaning the government's net proceeds are the full winning bid, not that amount minus incidental costs. Step 24. Complete the paperwork, official receipt, disposition record, committee certification. And Step 25. Drop the property from the books, the final act that closes the transaction entirely and relieves the accountable officer of responsibility for that item. Next slide. The floor price is always the appraised value, it can never be set lower. There's no ceiling on the upside, whoever bids highest and complies with every requirement wins. If the highest bid comes in below the floor price, check whether the shortfall is excessive, meaning more than 10% of the floor price plus the cost of running another auction. If it isn't excessive, the sale can proceed. If it is, a second auction is called with the floor reduced by 10%. If that second auction still falls excessively short, negotiated sale becomes available. And remember, an appraisal is only good for 6 months. Next slide. This is one of the most asked questions in disposal work, so this guide answers it by reading you the exact texts involved, rather than giving one summary claim. Presidential Decree 1445, Section 79, describes public auction as happening, quote, in the presence of the auditor concerned, end quote. Republic Act 7160, Section 379, uses the same phrasing for local government units. Those are the words of the statutes themselves. Commission Memorandum 95-088, Item 3.3.1, describes how the Commission's own auditing units carry this out. Upon receiving notice of a bid opening, quote, the unit head or his authorized representative may attend the same as observer, end quote. Both texts are read to you in full on the next 2 slides. One important update. Commission Circular 2011-002 confirms the general principle that pre-audit stays lifted, and is the more recent circular on that general question, covered earlier in this guide. This guide could not confirm whether the specific 1995 wording just quoted, the exact may attend as observer language, was reissued alongside the 2011 lifting, so treat that specific wording as historical implementing detail rather than a freshly confirmed 2011 procedure. Next slide. Republic Act 7160, Section 379, second paragraph, quote, if found valuable, the same shall be sold at public auction to the highest bidder under the supervision of the Committee on Awards and in the presence of the provincial, city or municipal auditor or his duly authorized representative. End quote. That is the statute's own wording. Next slide. And here, read in full, is Commission Memorandum 95-088, items 3.3.1 and 3.3.2, quote, upon receipt of the notice or schedule of the opening of bids, condemnation or destruction of unserviceable and other disposable government assets or property, and meetings or deliberations of the local pre-qualification, bids and awards committee, the unit head or his authorized representative may attend the same as observer. His observations shall be inputs in the post-audit of the transactions involved. In the case of opening of bids, whether in public bidding or public auction, the unit head or his authorized representative need not sign the abstract of bids nor authenticate the bids and their supporting documents. End quote. As with Section 380, this guide presents both texts and leaves the reading of them, for any specific transaction, to the agency and its assigned audit team. This specific memorandum implements the 1995 circular. Whether it was reissued or amended alongside Commission Circular 2011-002 was not confirmed in this guide's sources. Next slide. So concretely, what does an agency actually send the auditor? Two things. First, a copy of the schedule or notice of the opening of bids, at least 5 days before the scheduled time. Second, for unserviceable and disposable property specifically, a copy of the inspection report, submitted immediately after management's own inspection. These are notifications that keep the audit team informed. Neither text states a waiting period before the agency may proceed, and neither makes the transaction's validity depend on a reply. These specific timelines come from the 1995 implementing circular. Commission Circular 2011-002 reaffirms that pre-audit stays lifted generally, but this guide did not find a 2011-era document restating the 5-day figure specifically, so sending notice this early remains sound practice regardless. Next slide. This is the direct answer to a question many people ask. The governing texts describe attendance at a bid opening as something the unit head or an authorized representative may do, as an observer, with the resulting observations feeding into post-audit. Because attendance is framed this way, and because the pre-audit activities listed in Commission Circular 95-006 are expressly stated not to be prerequisites to a transaction's implementation, the texts do not set out a waiting period for a reply, and do not condition the auction's validity on someone from the audit team being physically present. In practice, an agency that has sent the required notice on time, and has otherwise followed the manual's procedure, has met its own documented obligations. Whether a representative attends is the audit team's own scheduling decision, made across the many transactions and offices under its coverage, not a decision the agency is in a position to compel, and not a basis, under these texts, for treating the disposal as incomplete. Commission Circular 2011-002 independently reaches the same bottom line on the general question, that pre-audit activities are not prerequisites to a transaction, using its own, more recent wording, which reinforces rather than contradicts the conclusion just given. Next slide. So what does happen afterward? The auditor reviews whether the disposal procedures followed were proper, whether the appraisal was reasonable when checked against the actual sale price, and whether the sale price came in below appraised value, and if so, whether management gave adequate justification. For negotiated sales specifically, the Commission's own internal guidance allows the unit head to seek input from the Technical Services Office on price reasonableness when the amount exceeds 2 million pesos. That's an option available to the audit team's own internal process, not a step the agency requests or initiates. This 2 million peso figure is a 1995-era detail. This guide did not confirm whether it was carried forward, changed, or dropped under the 2011 lifting. Next slide. Eligibility. Any natural or juridical person, association, partnership, or corporation with legal capacity may bid, as long as they comply with the Disposal Committee's own prescribed rules, which the committee sets out in its invitation to bid. Commonly requested items include valid identification, business registration for juridical entities, and notarized authorization for agents. Automatic disqualification applies to anyone currently blacklisted for submitting falsified documents, withdrawing a declared highest tender without justifiable cause, or failing to comply with a prior invitation to bid. Next slide. There's one explicit safeguard in the rules. If a disposal committee member or the head of office wants to buy property through direct employee purchase, the appraised value must be independently verified by the audit team before the sale proceeds. For public auction specifically, the same logic should extend as a matter of good governance. A committee member who wants to bid on a lot they helped appraise should step back from every decision touching that lot, disclose the interest in writing, and make sure the audit team knows, so the transaction gets extra scrutiny afterward. Where collusion is suspected, keep a complete written record and flag it for audit attention. Next slide. This comes up constantly in practice. Step 1. Organize the invitation to bid into clear lots, for example Lot 1, service vehicles, Lot 2, office furniture, Lot 3, scrap metal. Step 2. Set a separate floor price per lot. Step 3. A bidder who wants one lot only submits one sealed envelope, with a bond equal to 10% of that lot's minimum price. Step 4. A bidder who wants several specific lots submits a separate sealed envelope for each lot of interest. Step 5. A bidder who wants everything submits a single envelope covering all lots. Step 6. Each lot is evaluated and awarded independently, so one bidder can win one lot while a different bidder wins another. Step 7. Unsold lots don't hold up sold ones. Next slide. A practical tip. Grouping a highly desirable item together with undesirable junk in a single lot tends to suppress bidding interest in both. Splitting lots by item type and condition typically produces a better overall return for the government. Next slide. Do finish the appraisal before preparing the invitation to bid. Don't set a floor price on a stale or missing appraisal. Do post for the full 7 days in all 3 required places. Don't shortcut posting even for a single expected buyer. Do send the auditor the required 5-day notice. Don't treat auditor attendance as something the agency can compel. Do require the 10% bond from every bidder. Don't accept a tender without it. Do lot multi-item sales clearly. Don't bundle everything together if partial interest is likely. Do award to the highest complying bidder. Don't favor a higher but defective tender over a lower, valid one. Next slide. If no one bids at all, declare a failed auction and re-auction. If only one sealed tender comes in, it's treated as a failed auction. If all bids are non-complying, disqualify them. It's a failed auction if none remain valid. If 2 bidders tie for highest, resolve it by live bidding between them, same day. If the winner backs out after the award, the bond is forfeited and the award moves to the runner-up. On practical complications, if a committee member wants to bid, recuse, disclose in writing, and notify the audit team. If property condition changes before the auction date, re-inspect and reappraise if materially different. If live streaming technology isn't available, in-person attendance remains fully valid. And if real property or an antique gets accidentally included, remove it immediately, since separate rules apply. Next slide. We move to section 14, negotiated sale in depth. This mode is available only after the auction route has genuinely been tried, twice. Next slide. Step 1. Confirm the precondition. 2 public auctions must have already failed, not 1. Step 2. Identify negotiating parties, bidders from the failed auctions plus other prospective buyers. Step 3. Determine the applicable price floor, which depends on how much time has passed since the second failed auction. Step 4. Negotiate, singly or in groups, keeping a documented record. Step 5. Require a bond from every participant, the same discipline as a formal auction. Step 6. Award and collect payment, issue a receipt, and close the books. Next slide. Within 1 month of the second failed auction, the price floor is not lower than 80% of the appraised value. After 1 month, but still within 6 months, it's still not lower than 80%, but the buyer pool expands to any potential buyer. After 6 months, the property must be reappraised and sold at not lower than 90% of the new, reappraised value. Next slide. An important caution: negotiated sale without two genuinely failed public auctions on record is a mode of disposal violation, not a shortcut. Keep the abstract of bidding from both failed auctions in the file, since it's the evidence that this mode was even available. Next slide. As covered earlier in this guide, Republic Act 7160, Section 380, names Commission approval above certain thresholds for negotiated sales, while Commission Memorandum 95-088, Item 3.4.1, states that negotiated sale, quote, shall no longer require the prior approval of this Commission, end quote, with legality, propriety, and price reasonableness, quote, passed upon by the auditing unit in post-audit, end quote, instead. That same item adds one further detail. The unit head may seek the assistance of the Technical Services Office in determining reasonableness if the amount exceeds 2 million pesos. This is described as an option available to the unit head's own post-audit process, not a document or a request that the agency initiates. Commission Circular 2011-002, covered earlier in this guide, independently confirms as a more recent, general matter that pre-audit stays lifted, reinforcing the post-audit conclusion just given, even though this guide could not confirm whether the specific 2 million peso figure was itself restated in 2011. As with public auction, this guide does not resolve how the statute and the memorandum should be read together in a specific transaction. That belongs to the agency and its assigned audit team. Next slide. We move to Section 15, Condemnation and Destruction, for property that has no value left to protect. This section shows you exactly what the manual says about who is present, in its own exact words. Next slide. Step 1. Confirm valuelessness, meaning the property is unstable, hazardous, or its appraised value is less than the cost of trying to sell it. Step 2. Notify the auditor of the schedule, at least 5 days in advance. Step 3. Assemble the witnesses, a disposal committee representative, and, as the next two slides describe carefully, a commission on audit representative. Step 4. Salvage first, removing and recording any still usable parts before destruction begins. Step 5. Destroy the property by pounding, breaking, shredding, or another method that puts it beyond economic recovery. Step 6. Document it with a waste materials report. And Step 7. Close the books. Next slide. Here is the exact text from the current manual, Part 2, Section H, Item 1.4, quote, the condemnation or destruction of the properties shall be made in the presence of a representative or representatives of the disposal committee. A representative of the Commission on Audit shall also be present as an observer. A corresponding waste materials report or its equivalent shall be prepared by the office concerned to document such condemnation or destruction of properties. End quote. Next slide. And here is Commission Memorandum 95-088, Item 3.3.1, describing this exact same activity, quote, upon receipt of the notice or schedule of the opening of bids, condemnation or destruction of unserviceable and other disposable government assets or property, and meetings or deliberations of the local PBAC, the unit head or his authorized representative may attend the same as observer. His observations shall be inputs in the post-audit of the transactions involved. End quote. Notice the difference. The 2024 manual states the Commission representative's presence in the imperative, using the word shall. The 1995 memorandum describes the unit head's attendance, for this same activity, as something the representative may do. Both texts are read to you exactly as written. This guide does not resolve which governs a specific case. Confirm the applicable practice with your own assigned audit team, and, as with public auction, send the required advance notice regardless of how that question is resolved. One more note. Commission Circular 2011-002 is the more recent general authority confirming pre-audit stays lifted, though this guide did not confirm whether this specific 1995 memorandum's wording was itself reissued in 2011. Next slide. A reminder, Disposal of biohazard, chemical, and electronic waste must additionally follow the environmental laws on toxic substances and ecological solid waste management. Condemnation doesn't override those separate requirements. Next slide. We move to section 16, transfers, barter, and donation, 3 ways to move property within or beyond government. Next slide. Either agency can initiate a transfer, the owning agency offering it, or the receiving agency requesting it. It can be with or without cost. If with cost, it's appraised using the standard formulae. A property transfer report travels with the property. Here's the LGU specific catch. For local government units, Sangunian approval is required for transfers without cost. This comes from the local government code directly, and the national manual doesn't repeat it, so it's easy to miss. Secure it before the transfer, not after. Next slide. Barter is a direct property for property exchange with another government agency. No money changes hands, and there's no requirement that the values being exchanged be exactly equal. What matters is that the exchange is advantageous to government. Each side prepares its own property transfer report. One limit worth remembering: barter is only available between government agencies. Using it to effectively disguise a private party sale falls outside what this mode is meant for. Next slide. Step 1. Identify the recipient, a foreign government or a charitable, scientific, educational, or cultural institution. Step 2. Establish the exceptional justification, since donation is reserved for meritorious cases, not routine disposal. Step 3. Assemble the documentation. Step 4. Submit for approval to the National Budget Agency. Step 5. If the donee is foreign, approval is routed through the Foreign Affairs Department before the donation proceeds. Step 6. Once approved, execute the donation and close the books. Next slide. We move to section 17, return to supplier and sale to employees, 2 modes with a built-in financial flaw, and 1 with a built-in conflict of interest safeguard. Next slide. This only works if the original procurement contract actually included a return provision, so check that first. If it did, the property can be returned once it reaches the end of its useful life, and the supplier pays the government the residual value, at least 5% of the appraised value. That 5% is a floor, not a target. Don't accept less without documented justification. Next slide. If a property was issued to a specific employee, that employee has the right of first refusal. Only if they decline does it open up to other employees. Retiring employees get special timing rules. The property must have been issued at least 2.5 years before retirement, and must have reached at least half its useful life. The one built-in safeguard: if the buyer is a disposal committee member or the head of office, the appraised value must be independently verified by the audit team before the sale goes through. This is the one mode where the rules spell out a conflict of interest check word for word. Pooled or common use property doesn't qualify for direct purchase, it has to go through internal auction instead. Next slide. We move to section 18, junk, scrap, and direct negotiation, the last 2 modes, for property with almost nothing left, and for the one buyer market. Next slide. This applies when the cost of keeping and maintaining the property exceeds its salvage value, and the selling price isn't lower than 10% of salvage value. If those conditions aren't met, deliver it to a registered recycling facility instead. Before selling as junk, remove and record any parts still usable elsewhere, canvass at least 3 current scrap prices, and compute the appraised value as current price per unit weight times actual weight. Next slide. This is the narrowest mode, reserved for 4 specific situations. The market for this property is genuinely limited to one willing buyer. National security, public interest, legal, human rights, or environmental considerations point to one particular buyer. The potential buyer is already using the asset, or the asset sits on the potential buyer's premises under a hire or free use arrangement. The price anchor is the reserve price, the average of the floor price and the buyer's initial offer, but only if the gap is more than 20% of the floor price. Next slide. A caution: direct negotiation is not a general-purpose alternative to public auction for convenience. Document clearly which of the 4 qualifying circumstances applies before using this mode. If a genuine competitive market of buyers actually exists, direct negotiation is the wrong tool. Next slide. We move to section 19, special property categories. Some items need a specialist's hand before the standard rules apply. Next slide. Information and communications technology equipment needs coordination with the ICT authority's specific disposal guidelines, especially around data security. Hospital equipment needs coordination with the health department. Hazardous materials need coordination with the environmental authority. Museum quality materials, antiques, and works of art are referred to the National Museum. Copyright documents go through the National Library. And patent-related models go through the Intellectual Property Office. Next slide. We move to section 20, dropping property from the books, the step that formally closes the loop, and the step most often forgotten. Next slide. Step 1, the property officer completes the paperwork. Step 2, it goes up the chain, submitted to the head of the property section, who reports it to the disposal committee. Step 3, the committee certifies, with a formal certification addressed to the chief accountant. Step 4, the journal entry is prepared, removing the asset's cost and accumulated depreciation, and recognizing the resulting gain or loss. And step 5, individual accountability closes, as the property receipt on file is cancelled, formally relieving the end user of responsibility. Next slide. Watch for this: a disposed item still showing as on hand in the books months after the sale is one of the most common findings in practice. It almost always means this closing step was never completed, the sale happened, but the accounting side was left hanging. Escalate to the chief accountant immediately if this is discovered. Next slide. We move to section 21, the complete checklist, everything you need in one folder, before you call it done. Next slide. For committee and authority, the order or resolution constituting the disposal committee, properly approved, proof of the committee's correct composition, and internal rules and procedures, if adopted. For property identification, the inspection report in triplicate, survey reports and missing parts list, certified, chassis and engine stencils and photographs for vehicles, waste materials or transfer report as applicable, and the completed component checklist. Next slide. For appraisal documents, the appraisal report with full valuation workings, at least 3 canvassed or advertised prices, a history record supporting unserviceability, and the exact formula used, shown in the computation. For mode-specific add-ons, for auction, the invitation to bid, proof of posting, tenders, bonds, and abstract of bidding. For negotiated sale, proof of 2 failed auctions. For donation, the justification, resolution, and approval trail. And for employee sale, proof of issuance timeline and audit verification if a committee member is buying. Next slide. You'll need the notice of award, proof of full payment received on time, a signed tally-out sheet upon claiming, the official receipt for the proceeds, the completed disposition portion of the inspection or waste report, the disposal committee's certification to the chief accountant, and the resulting journal entry voucher. Next slide. We move to section 22, when property is lost, not just unserviceable, a completely different process with its own extensive documentation. Next slide. This is a critical distinction. Disposal covers property that still exists but is unserviceable, obsolete, or no longer needed. A request for relief from accountability covers property that no longer exists, lost, stolen, or destroyed by calamity. Filing an ordinary disposal report for a stolen vehicle instead of a relief request is a common, avoidable error that can leave the accountable officer personally exposed. Next slide. For the core narrative, notice of loss with the exact filing date, the accountable officer's sworn statement of facts and circumstances, affidavits from 2 disinterested witnesses, the official investigation report, and a finding on whether the officer was at fault or negligent. For supporting proof, description and book value of what was lost, the latest inventory and inspection report before the loss, any insurance policy and proceeds received, police, fire, or local government certification where relevant, and comments and recommendation of the audit team. Next slide. We move to section 23, the auditor's role, clearly explained. This section brings together everything this guide has shown about the auditor's role, in one place, in the Commission's own words. Next slide. This is the starting point for every question about Commission involvement in a disposal transaction, and it has a real history worth knowing, not just a single date. In 1995, the Commission on Audit lifted pre-audit across the board. That lifting was not permanent and unbroken, however. Commission Circular 2009-002, dated May 18, 2009, reinstituted pre-audit for selected government transactions. Commission Circular 2011-002, dated July 22, 2011, then withdrew that selective pre-audit and lifted it again, except those required by existing law. The 2011 circular is therefore the more recent general authority on this question, and the one this guide now leads with. Next slide. Here is that 2011 circular in full, quote, "This Commission has resolved to reaffirm the concept that fiscal responsibility resides with agency management. This Commission hereby withdraws selective pre-audit under COA Circular Number 2009-002 and thereby lifts all pre-audit activities presently being performed on financial transactions of the national government agencies, government-owned and/or controlled corporations and local government units, except those required by existing law. Pre-audit activities shall henceforth be the responsibility of the agencies concerned as part of their accounting and fiscal control processes." End quote. The 2011 circular also preserves a safety valve, stating, quote, "Whenever circumstances warrant, such as where the internal control system of a government agency is inadequate, this Commission may reinstitute pre-audit." End quote. Next slide. For historical context, here is the 1995 circular, items 1.01 and 4.01, quote, "This Commission hereby lifts all pre-audit activities presently being performed on financial transactions of national government agencies, government-owned and/or controlled corporations and local government units. The pre-audit of all financial transactions involving implementation or prosecution of projects and/or payment of claims is hereby lifted without exception. These transactions shall be subject to post-audit by the Commission on Audit or its representatives." End quote. This is quoted here for its itemized detail, which the shorter 2011 circular does not repeat, as the next slide explains. Next slide. No prior Commission approval is a precondition to implementing a project, perfecting a contract, paying a claim, or acting on an application filed with the agency. That's stated directly in both the 1995 and 2011 circulars. The 1995 circular itemized specific activities as lifted, including witnessing of bid openings, witnessing of condemnation or destruction, and approval of negotiated price for unserviceable property. The 2011 circular restates the lifting in general terms and does not repeat that itemized list. This guide could not locate a 2011-era memorandum reissuing that itemized detail. So, where this guide cites the specific 1995 mechanics, the 5-day notice, the may attend as observer language, the 2 million peso threshold, that is flagged as historical implementing detail, confirmed current only as to the general principle, not necessarily as to every specific figure. Next slide. Here's the complete list, drawn from the 1995 Implementing Circular. A copy of the inspection report for unserviceable or disposable property, sent immediately after management's own inspection. A schedule or notice of the opening of bids, at least 5 days before the scheduled time. A schedule or notice of condemnation or destruction, also at least 5 days before. And a pre-repair evaluation report, where applicable, within 5 days of the evaluation. These specific figures are not repeated word for word in the 2011 circular, but they remain consistent with its general notification spirit. Next slide. For public auction and negotiated sale, the texts throughout this guide describe review as happening in post-audit, with attendance at proceedings framed as something a commission representative may do as an observer. For the 2024 manual specific words on condemnation and destruction, and for Section 380 specific words on negotiated sale, this guide has read you the exact text on both sides, rather than picking one reading. What is consistent across every version of these texts, from 1995 through 2011? None of them states a waiting period for a commission reply, and none of them makes a disposal transaction's validity depend on the commission acting within a set number of days. Where a specific transaction raises a real question, particularly a high-value one, the safest approach is the one repeated throughout this guide. Put it in writing, send it early, and ask your assigned audit team directly which practice currently applies, rather than assuming an answer either way. Next slide. One long-standing rule captures the spirit of the auditor's involvement in property matters generally, from Section 44 of the Government Auditing Code, quote, "The auditor shall from time to time conduct a careful and thorough check and audit of all property or supplies of the agency to which he is assigned, and such check and audit shall not be confined to a mere inspection and examination of the pertinent vouchers, inventories, and other papers, but shall include an ocular verification of the existence and condition of the property or supplies." End quote. That's the same instinct behind every inspection, checklist, and photograph requirement in this guide. Next slide. We move to Section 24, Personal Liability and Accountability. Disposal is not a risk-free administrative act, so let's be precise about exactly where personal exposure begins. Next slide. The head of any office is immediately and primarily responsible for all government funds and property under that office. Anyone entrusted with custody of property is directly responsible to that head, without erasing the head's own responsibility. Using government property in violation of law becomes the personal liability of whoever is found directly responsible. A supervising officer who fails to exercise due diligence over accountable staff becomes jointly and solidarily liable for any resulting loss. And an accountable officer is liable for a property's money value in case of improper use, and for losses caused by negligence, whether or not the property was in their physical custody at the time. Next slide. Know your protection here. An accountable officer who follows a superior's illegal order isn't automatically protected, unless they first put their objection in writing to that superior before acting. Silent compliance does not shield the subordinate from liability. If directed to dispose of property in a way that skips appraisal, skips a required notice to the auditor, or sells below floor price without following the adjustment procedure, put the objection on record before proceeding. Next slide. We move to Section 25, 40 Misconceptions, Corrected. This section closes the gap between what people commonly assume and what the rules actually say, one myth at a time. Next slide. Myth. Public auction is the only legal way to dispose of government property. Reality. 10 modes exist. Auction is only the default when the method chosen is sale. Why this trips people up? Auction is simply the most visible and most commonly used mode, so people mistake the most common path for the only path. If you only ever reach for auction, you'll miss cases where donation, transfer, or direct negotiation would actually serve the government better. Myth. The Commission on Audit must approve a disposal before it can happen. Reality. For LGUs, the local chief executive is the approving authority. Pre-audit was lifted government-wide in 1995, as this guide explained in detail. Why this matters? Agencies sometimes stall a disposal for weeks waiting for a commission's signature that the current framework never actually required, which just means the property sits deteriorating for no legal reason. Myth: once appraised, a property's value stays valid indefinitely. Reality: an appraisal is only good for 6 months. Why this matters? Prices for scrap metal, second-hand vehicles, and used equipment move with the market, so a stale appraisal risks either shortchanging the government or scaring off buyers with an unrealistic floor price. Myth: any employee can simply buy government property up for disposal. Reality: the employee it was issued to has right of first refusal. Others may buy only if that person declines. Why this matters? Skipping this order isn't just a technicality, it can look like favoritism if a different employee gets first access to a desirable item. Next slide. Myth: old disposal circulars from the 1990s still govern today. Reality: the prior national manual was expressly repealed by the current 2024 circular. Why this matters? An office still training staff off a photocopied 1992 manual is teaching rules that have no legal force anymore, and any transaction built on them is vulnerable to challenge. Myth: negotiated sale can be used any time to skip a public bidding process. Reality: it only becomes available after 2 public auctions have genuinely failed. Why this matters? Negotiated sale exists as a fallback, not a convenience, precisely because private negotiation is more vulnerable to underpricing and favoritism than open competitive bidding. Myth: a property officer can quietly destroy unserviceable items alone. Reality: condemnation or destruction requires both a committee representative and, per the current manual's own words, a commission observer present. Why this matters? Destruction is irreversible, so it's the one moment in the entire disposal process where a witnessed record matters most, since there's no property left afterward to re-inspect if something was mishandled. Myth: this framework also covers disposal of land and buildings. Reality: real property is expressly excluded and follows entirely separate guidelines. Why this matters? Real property disposal involves title transfer, appraisal by different specialists, and often legislative approval, so applying the personal property playbook to land is simply the wrong toolkit. Next slide. Myth: very old items can be junked without any appraisal at all. Reality: appraisal is mandatory before disposal, regardless of the mode eventually used, even when the outcome is simply a junk value computation. Why this matters? Skipping appraisal means skipping the one step that actually sets a defensible minimum price, leaving the transaction open to a finding that the government sold something for less than it was worth. Myth: any officer, regardless of rank, can chair the disposal committee. Reality: a specific minimum rank is required for the chairperson. Why this matters? The rank requirement exists so the person making appraisal and award decisions has enough organizational authority to actually be accountable for them. Myth: verbal notice to the auditor is sufficient, the inspection report is optional paperwork. Reality: it's the formal basis for removing the property from the books, it's mandatory, not optional. Why this matters? Without that report, the property technically still exists in the accounting records even after it's physically gone, which is exactly the kind of book-to-floor mismatch that shows up as an audit finding. Myth: property lost to theft is processed the same way as unserviceable property. Reality: loss requires an entirely different process, a request for relief from accountability, with its own extensive documentation, as covered in Section 22. Why this matters? Using the wrong process here can leave the accountable officer personally exposed, since a disposal report doesn't examine fault or negligence the way a relief request does. Next slide. Myth: selling below the appraised value is fine as long as there's a willing buyer. Reality: the floor price can't go below appraised value without following a specific, documented adjustment procedure, covered in Section 13. Why this matters? A willing buyer at a low price is not, by itself, justification. The 10% excessive shortfall test exists precisely to stop underpricing from becoming routine. Myth: a department head alone can approve donating property to any organization. Reality: donation requires evaluation and approval from the National Budget Agency, and foreign donees need Foreign Affairs clearance too. Why this matters: donation gives away government property for nothing in return, so it deliberately has more layers of approval than a sale does. Myth: digital payment is not allowed for government auction transactions. Reality: it's expressly recognized as an accepted payment mode alongside cash and manages checks. Why this matters: refusing a legitimate digital payment can needlessly delay a sale or push a buyer toward cash-only arrangements that are harder to trace. Myth: transferring property to another government agency needs no paperwork since it stays within government. Reality: a signed property transfer report is required regardless. Why this matters: without that report, neither agency's books accurately reflect who's actually accountable for the item, and accountability gaps are exactly what audits are designed to catch. Next slide. Myth: barter requires the properties being exchanged to be of exactly equal value. Reality: barter is defined precisely because it does not require equivalent value, only that the exchange benefits government. Why this matters: insisting on exact equivalence would make barter almost impossible to use in practice, since two agencies rarely have items of identical worth to swap. Myth: a failed public auction means the property can never be sold. Reality: a failed auction simply triggers a re-auction, and the second failure opens the door to negotiated sale. Why this matters: treating a failed auction as a dead end causes properties to sit indefinitely in storage, deteriorating further, when the manual actually gives you a clear next step. Myth: component rating tables apply to every type of property, including furniture and computers. Reality: furniture with no major components uses a single whole unit rating. Computers go straight to scrap value instead. Why this matters: forcing a component breakdown onto an item that doesn't have meaningful separate components just wastes time without producing a more accurate appraisal. Myth: the disposal committee's decision must always be unanimous. Reality: when members can't agree, a majority vote settles the appraised value. Why this matters: requiring unanimity would let a single holdout member freeze a disposal indefinitely, which defeats the entire purpose of having a committee decide collectively. Next slide. Myth: barangays don't need a proper disposal committee, only cities and municipalities do. Reality: barangays are LGUs with their own accountable officers and their own threshold under the local government code. The same committee process applies. Why this matters: assuming barangays are exempt leaves the smallest, often least resourced local units without the very safeguards designed to protect them from later liability. Myth: a disposal committee member can never bid in any public auction under any circumstance. Reality: there's no blanket prohibition, but recusal and full written disclosure is the prudent, expected safeguard, as this guide covered in Section 13. Why this matters: an absolute ban isn't actually written into the rules, but treating conflicts casually, without disclosure, is what turns an innocent purchase into a credibility problem later. Myth: the 6-month appraisal window resets every time the committee meets about it. Reality: it's tied strictly to elapsed time from the appraisal date, not to committee activity. Why this matters: agencies sometimes assume a meeting or discussion refreshes the clock, then discover months later that they've been operating on an expired valuation the whole time. Myth: if few bidders are expected, posting the invitation to bid can be skipped or shortened. Reality: posting requirements apply regardless of anticipated turnout. Why this matters: skipping posting because you expect low interest is exactly the kind of shortcut that later looks like the auction was steered toward a predetermined buyer. Next slide. Myth: only the single highest ranking agency official can sign the invitation to bid. Reality, it can be signed by the head of agency or any other duly authorized official. Why this matters? Insisting only the top official can sign creates unnecessary bottlenecks, especially in offices where that official travels frequently or delegates routine functions. Myth: a losing bidder's auction bond can be retained by the agency as a processing fee. Reality: losing bidders' bonds must be returned immediately once the winner is announced. Why this matters? Holding onto a losing bidder's money for any reason discourages future participation and has no basis in the rules that govern the bond's purpose. Myth: fair-priced government property can be sold directly to a private company without any competitive step. Reality: public auction is the default. Direct sale without competition is allowed only under narrowly defined qualifying circumstances. Why this matters? Even a fair price doesn't substitute for the transparency that competitive bidding provides, since fairness of price and fairness of process are two different things. Myth: antique or museum quality government items follow the same appraisal formula as ordinary equipment. Reality: they're excluded entirely and referred to the National Museum for valuation. Why this matters? Applying a scrap and depreciation formula to a genuinely valuable historical or artistic item would badly undervalue something that needs specialist appraisal instead. Next slide. Myth: once a disposal committee recommends a specific mode, it's locked in even if that mode fails. Reality: if the chosen mode fails, a failed auction for instance, the process legitimately moves to the next appropriate step. Why this matters? Treating the original recommendation as unchangeable would leave properties stuck the moment the first attempt doesn't work out, when the manual actually anticipates exactly this and provides a path forward. Myth: a blacklisted bidder's winning bid must still be honored if it's the highest offer. Reality: blacklisted bidders are automatically disqualified, regardless of how high their offer is. Why this matters? Blacklisting exists specifically to protect future transactions from bad actors, so honoring their bid anyway would defeat the entire purpose of maintaining the list. Myth: old computers and electronics appraised as junk can simply be thrown away. Reality: e-waste disposal must still follow the separate environmental laws on hazardous and electronic waste, even once appraised as scrap. Why this matters? Junk valuation is about price, not about environmental compliance. Those are two separate questions that both have to be answered. Myth: a retiring employee can always buy their issued property, no matter how recently it was issued. Reality: specific timing rules apply, issuance at least 2.5 years before retirement, and at least half the useful life elapsed. Why this matters? Without these thresholds, someone could simply be issued brand new equipment right before retiring and then buy it cheap, which is exactly the kind of arrangement these timing rules are designed to prevent. Next slide. Myth: a negotiated sale price can be set lower than what a bidder had offered at the failed auction. Reality: the negotiated price shouldn't fall below the highest offer from the failed auction, and must still meet the applicable percentage for. Why this matters? If negotiation could undercut what a bidder was already willing to pay in the open auction, negotiated sale would become a way to sell for less than the market had already shown the government could get. Myth: once a property is destroyed, any salvaged parts need no further paperwork. Reality: salvaged, still serviceable parts must still be properly recorded and routed through an applicable disposal mode of their own. Why this matters? A salvaged engine or usable component still has value, and value without a paper trail is exactly the kind of gap that later looks like unaccounted for property. Myth: every single disposal transaction needs a Sangunian resolution, no matter the mode. Reality: Sangunian approval is specifically required for transfers without cost. Other modes follow a different approval chain. Why this matters? Assuming every transaction needs Sangunian approval creates unnecessary delay for modes that were never designed to require it, while genuinely missing it for transfers is a real compliance gap. Myth: digital payment is now mandatory for every disposal transaction. Reality, it's one accepted option alongside cash and manager's checks, not an exclusive requirement. Why this matters? Treating digital payment as mandatory could exclude buyers in areas without reliable digital payment access, when the rule was written to add an option, not remove others. Next slide. Myth. Since commission approval isn't required beforehand, post-audit review has no real consequences. Reality. Post-audit can still disallow a transaction, demand justification, trigger technical review, and expose responsible officers to personal liability, as covered in Section 24. Why this matters? No prior approval does not mean no accountability. The review simply happens afterward instead of before, and it still carries real consequences. Myth. An appraisal report and a certificate of inspection are basically the same document. Reality. They serve different purposes. One establishes value, the other certifies how a specific item was actually disposed of. Why this matters? Submitting one when the other is required leaves a gap in the file that an auditor will notice immediately. Myth. Sale proceeds can be spent directly by the office that ran the disposal. Reality. Proceeds must be officially receipted and recorded through standard government fund procedures, not spent informally by the disposing office. Why this matters? Disposal proceeds are still public funds, and treating them as a discretionary windfall for the disposing office is precisely the kind of informal handling that invites a finding. Myth. If a property was donated by a private party originally, it can be disposed of informally. Reality. Once accepted into government custody, donated property is government property and follows the exact same disposal framework as anything purchased. Why this matters? The origin of a property, whether bought or donated, has no bearing on the rules that govern its eventual disposal once it belongs to government. Next slide. We move to Section 26, 40 Common Pitfalls and Fixes. These are real operational snags, grouped by where they happen, each paired with a concrete way through. Next slide. Pitfall. No qualified technical staff to inspect specialized equipment. This comes up constantly in smaller offices that simply don't have an in-house mechanic or engineer. Fix. Engage a qualified licensed appraiser or technical specialist to inspect and assess the equipment, since guessing at a technical condition rating undermines the whole appraisal that follows. Pitfall. Disposal committee can't be properly constituted, no one meets the minimum rank. Fix. The head of office may designate additional personnel while keeping the core composition intact, so short staffing is not an excuse to skip the rank requirement, it's a reason to actively fill the gap. Pitfall. Properties scattered across far-flung offices, complicating inspection. Fix. Schedule consolidated inspection runs by geographic cluster, delegating to authorized representatives, turning what feels like dozens of separate trips into a handful of efficient ones. Pitfall. Confidential data still sits on ICT equipment scheduled for disposal. Fix. Extract, backup, and securely wipe data before disposal proceeds. This is a committee responsibility, not an afterthought, because data left on a disposed device is a security risk that outlives the disposal itself. Next slide. Pitfall. Duty-free imported equipment is being disposed of within its restricted period. Fix. Confirm the 5-year lock-in has passed. If not, disposal must wait, or the buyer assumes the tax liability, as covered in Section 2. Skipping this check can turn an ordinary sale into an unexpected tax problem for the buyer. Pitfall. No local newspaper is available in a remote area for required publication. Fix. Satisfy the posting requirements fully, since the newspaper trigger applies specifically once the peso threshold is met, meaning smaller value items can often proceed on posting alone. Pitfall. Disposal committee members disagree on the appraised value. Fix. Majority vote settles it when unanimous agreement isn't possible, so a genuine disagreement doesn't have to stall the whole process indefinitely. Pitfall. The property is already missing by the time paperwork is being prepared. Fix. Switch to a request for relief from accountability instead of the ordinary disposal route. since continuing down the disposal path for something that no longer physically exists just produces paperwork that doesn't match reality. Next slide. Pitfall: an employee who once held the property has since resigned without formal turnover. Fix: trace custody through property records, requiring formal reclaiming before disposal proceeds, so accountability is properly closed before the item moves into the disposal pipeline. Pitfall: real property or antiques get mixed into an ordinary disposal batch. Fix: remove immediately, since both are excluded and need separate handling, and processing them under the wrong framework can invalidate the whole transaction for that item. Pitfall: no comparable market data exists for unique or obsolete equipment. Fix: fall back to acquisition cost, then replacement cost, in that order, following the same valuation hierarchy covered in section 10, rather than guessing at a figure. Pitfall: missing original purchase documents for very old property. Fix: use the amount on the property receipt as the acquisition cost instead. A documented substitute that keeps the appraisal grounded in something verifiable rather than an estimate pulled from memory. Next slide. Pitfall: the appraisal expires before disposal is actually completed. Fix: reappraisal is mandatory, never proceed on a stale valuation, because a 6-month-old price simply may not reflect what the market will pay today. Pitfall: a wide gap shows up between the agency's appraisal and the auditor's own assessment. Fix: provide complete supporting documentation up front, including canvassed prices, checklists, and photographs, especially for high-value items, since a well-documented appraisal is much harder to challenge than a bare number. Pitfall: an imported item has no available local replacement for some parts. Fix: treat that specific component as junk, separate from parts still available domestically, rather than forcing the whole item into one valuation method that doesn't fit every component equally. Pitfall: historical currency exchange data is hard to source for old acquisition years. Fix: use actual historical rates for the specific years involved, never an estimate, since an approximated rate can meaningfully skew the final appraised value one way or the other. Next slide. Pitfall: no entry in the component rating table matches a specialized item. Fix: use the closest analogous category, or rate the whole unit directly if it has no major components, rather than leaving the appraisal incomplete for lack of a perfect match. Pitfall: a vehicle's logbook or odometer reading is missing. Fix: rely on ocular inspection and available maintenance records, noting the gap explicitly, so the appraisal is honest about what evidence was and wasn't available. Pitfall: the appraisal report is chronically delayed by the committee. Fix: track against the 6-month validity clock from day one, building in deadlines well before the appraisal would otherwise expire. Pitfall: several properties of the same type but very different condition get one blended figure. Fix: appraise and rate condition item by item, never as a class average, since a blended figure systematically overvalues the worst items and undervalues the best ones. Next slide. Pitfall: zero bidders show up to a scheduled auction. Fix: declare a failed auction and schedule a re-auction, a normal, anticipated outcome the manual already has a path for, not a crisis. Pitfall: only one sealed tender comes in. Fix: treat it as a failed auction, the single bid shouldn't be opened, because a genuine auction depends on competition, and one bidder alone can't demonstrate that the price reflects real market interest. Pitfall: all bids received fail to comply with requirements. Fix: disqualify them. If none remain valid, this counts as a failed auction too, since compliance with the invitation to bid isn't optional even when bidders show real interest. Pitfall: a buyer wants only some of several items on offer. Fix: structure the invitation into separate lots, with separate envelopes per lot of interest, exactly as walked through in detail earlier in this guide's public auction section. Next slide. Pitfall: collusion is suspected between a bidder and an agency insider. Fix: keep a full written record, flag for audit attention, and consider a blacklisting inquiry, since a documented trail is what turns a suspicion into something that can actually be investigated. Pitfall: a disposal committee member wants to personally bid on a lot. Fix: recuse from the lot's appraisal and evaluation, disclose the interest in writing, and notify the audit team, the governance safeguard covered earlier in this guide. Pitfall: the winning bidder backs out after being declared highest. Fix: cancel the award, forfeit the bond, and move to the second highest bidder, so a change of heart at the last minute doesn't cost the government the sale entirely. Pitfall: the winning bidder simply doesn't pay within the deadline. Fix: cancel the award and forfeit the bond. The runner-up gets the chance, with a fresh bond, the same safety net that protects the government from a non-paying winner stalling the whole transaction. Next slide. Pitfall: the awardee never comes to claim the property. Fix: cancel the award after 30 days, charge storage and incidental costs, and ownership reverts to government, so an indefinitely unclaimed item doesn't sit in limbo forever. Pitfall: digital payment for an award fails to process. Fix: fall back to cash or a manager's check, both remain valid alongside digital payment, so a technical payment glitch doesn't derail an otherwise valid sale. Pitfall: negotiated sale is attempted without two truly failed public auctions. Fix: not permitted, the two failed auction precondition is not optional, a point worth repeating because it's one of the most consequential rules to get wrong. Pitfall: a donation to a foreign institution stalls waiting on approvals. Fix: route through the National Budget Agency first, which forwards the request to Foreign Affairs, following the correct sequence instead of trying to approach both at once. Next slide. Pitfall: a supplier disputes the residual value owed on a returned item. Fix: confirm the original contract's return clause and the appraised value basis. Since the floor is fixed at 5%, a documented contract clause resolves the dispute far faster than a verbal disagreement. Pitfall: the audit team wasn't notified in advance of a scheduled auction or destruction. Fix: send notice at least 5 days ahead. This isn't required for approval, but it preserves the opportunity to observe, and it's simply good practice regardless of how the earlier legal nuance is resolved. Pitfall: proceeds are collected but no receipt has been issued by the time of audit review. Fix: immediate receipt issuance is required upon any payment. Delay is itself a finding, so treat receipt issuance as part of the same moment as collecting payment, not a follow-up task. Pitfall: a disposed item still shows as on hand in the books months later. Fix: the books dropping step was likely never completed. Escalate to the accountant immediately, since this is one of the most common and most avoidable paper trail failures covered earlier in this guide. Next slide. Pitfall: the disposal file is scattered across several offices when auditors arrive. Fix: keep the full document set together, in one folder, per disposal transaction, from the very first inspection report through to the final journal entry. Pitfall: no Sangunian resolution was secured for a cost-free transfer to another LGU. Fix: this is a distinct requirement under the local government code. Secure it before the transfer, not after, since it can't be retroactively fixed once the property has already changed hands. Pitfall: a part salvaged during destruction has no clear disposal path of its own. Fix: record it properly and either transfer it to another property or dispose of it through an applicable mode, closing the same kind of documentation gap covered in the misconceptions section. And pitfall: barter gets used to effectively disguise an underpriced private party sale. Fix: barter is limited strictly to exchanges between government agencies, not private parties, a boundary worth remembering since it's the one most likely to be stretched past its intended purpose. Next slide. We move to section 27, frequently asked questions, the questions that come up most often, answered directly. Next slide. Question: can the smallest local unit dispose of its own property, or must it go through a bigger office? Answer: every local government unit, down to the barangay, has its own accountable offices and its own approval threshold. It runs the same committee process at its own level. Question: what if there's no way to get 3 comparable market prices for a very unusual item? Answer: fall back to acquisition cost. If that's unavailable too, move to junk value if the item is beyond repair. Question: does changing who sits on the disposal committee restart the 6-month appraisal clock? Answer: no, validity is tied strictly to the passage of time from the appraisal date. Next slide. Question: is a council or board resolution required for every single method of disposal? Answer: not universally. It's specifically required for cost-free transfers under the local government code. Question: can property be sold to an employee without going through appraisal first? Answer: no, appraisal is required no matter which disposal method is eventually used. Question: what happens if a property scheduled for disposal turns out to already be missing? Answer: it's no longer an ordinary disposal case, it shifts to a request for relief from accountability. Next slide. Question: are youth council or other special body properties disposed of differently? Answer: no separate framework exists for them, they're LGU property and follow the same disposal process as everything else. Question: who keeps custody of the bidding records after an auction closes? Answer: the disposal committee's secretariat retains them, with copies distributed to the accounting office and the audit team as applicable. Next slide. We reach section 28, the quick reference summary, everything on one page, for the moment you need a fast answer. Next slide. One more time, the full flow. Identify the property against the 9 qualifying conditions, constitute or activate the disposal committee, prepare the documentation, conduct the physical inspection, rate the condition, component by component, appraise, using the correct formula, choose the most advantageous method of disposal, get it approved by the proper authority, execute the disposal, collect proceeds and complete the documentation, and drop the property from the books. Next slide. And the 10 modes, one more time: condemnation or destruction, transfer to another agency, barter, donation, return to supplier, sale to employees, public auction, the default, negotiated sale, only after 2 failed auctions, junk, scrap, or recycling, and direct negotiation, for 1 identified buyer only. Next slide. 5 numbers worth memorizing. 6 months, how long an appraisal stays valid. 10%, the minimum auction bond. 5 working days, the deadline to pay the balance after an auction award. 30 calendar days, the deadline for the buyer to claim the property. And 2 failed auctions, what has to happen before negotiated sale becomes available. Next slide. A closing thought: sequence protects everyone. Inspect first, rate condition second, appraise third, only then choose and execute a method of disposal. Every recurring problem in this guide, from underpriced sales to audit findings, traces back to that sequence being skipped or reversed. Next slide. Before we close, here is the complete list of sources cited throughout this guide. The COA-DBM Joint Circular Number 2024-1, the Revised Manual on the Disposal of Government Properties, Presidential Decree Number 1445, the Government Auditing Code, Republic Act Number 7160, the Local Government Code, Book 2, Title 6, Sections 379 through 383, Commission on Audit Circular Number 2011-002, dated July 22, 2011. Commission on Audit Circular Number 2009-002, dated May 18, 2009, reference for historical context. Commission on Audit Circular Number 95-006. Commission on Audit Memorandum Number 95-088. Commission on Audit Circular Number 89-296. Commission on Audit Circular Number 2003-007. Commission on Audit Circular Number 2022-004. Executive Order Number 888, Series of 1983. Executive Order Number 170, Series of 2022. Commission on Audit Memorandum Number 92-751, and the Manual on Appraisal of Government Properties except Real Estate, Antique Property, and Works of Art. Every citation strip in this guide names the specific issuance and section or item number behind the statement on that slide. Where two issuances describe the same situation differently, principally around Commission on Audit involvement in negotiated sale and in condemnation or destruction, and around the 1995 versus 2011 pre-audit circulars, this guide has read you both texts side by side, rather than choosing one reading. Next slide. That completes this audio guide on the disposal of government properties. Keep this guide close whenever a disposal transaction is underway, and whenever a specific transaction raises a question this guide hasn't fully resolved. Remember the guiding principle throughout. Put it in writing, and confirm the applicable practice with your own assigned audit team. Thank you for listening.